Welcome to Dot Social, the first podcast to explore the world of decentralized social media. Each episode, host Mike McHugh talks to a leader in this movement, someone who sees the Fediverse's tremendous potential and understands that this could be the internet's next wave. Today, Mike's talking to Samantha Lai, a senior research analyst at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and to Jaz-Michael King, the executive director of IFTAS. IFTAS offers trust and safety support for volunteer content moderators, community managers, admins, and more. Samantha and Jaz often collaborate, and we were thrilled to get them together for this episode. We hope you enjoy this conversation.
Samantha Lai, Jaz-Michael, great to have you on Dot Social.
Thanks for having us.
Great to be here. Thanks for inviting.
You know, I thought a fun place to start, a useful place to start, would be telling you a bit about a story about a moderation event I had to deal with just recently. I posted something from my Flipboard about Elon Musk. That was an article about Elon. And most people, had some interesting things to say about it. I posted it to my Flipboard account, which is now federated to the Fediverse. But I did get one odd reply. It was a fairly challenging reply. There was nothing like hateful about the reply, but it was definitely a little concerning. And, given that I also am responsible for the Flipboard.com instance, I thought I should probably just investigate this because, my spidey sense was going off. When I went and looked at his posts, it was very clear that this person was some sort of, neo-Nazi, calling for the death of politicians, that kind of stuff, right? So I realized, okay, well, this is a guy that we need to block. And of course, I blocked him personally. I called up Greg and said, hey, we should block this guy on our instance. But then also, I looked at the instance that he was on. And it was run by another guy, and that instance administrator was also a neo-Nazi, and denying the Holocaust, the whole bit, right? All of the things that neo-Nazis do, and clearly was fomenting hate speech on this instance, where there were about probably 1,800 different people on this instance. So of course, in addition to blocking this person and the administrator, we also blocked the entire instance because it was pretty clear to us, like this was just a group of bad actors in the Fediverse. And then, of course, I also sent out a message to Eugene and to Stux and a few other large instance owners and said, hey, just heads up, we ran into this guy. You might want to consider blocking him. And then someone also posted to me, hey, you might want to think about posting, with a hashtag Fediblock with the name of the instance. And so I did that. I was a little bit nervous about that because it was like a public moderation thing and it felt a little off. But at the same time, I was like, well, these are Nazis. We should block them. This shouldn't be that hard. So let me just do this. But it definitely, kind of started causing me to ask some questions like, well, is there a better way of doing this? I've noticed that some of the folks that are posting with Fediblock are not, they have beefs with each other. There are like a lot of unprofessional moderators. And it seems like, a pretty significant, hammer to use in a situation. There's a lot of different, sort of, as you guys well know, ways to deal with this. So, for me, I thought on the one hand, it was great. It was a decentralized, kind of moderation experience where we were able to block 1,800 Nazis from the Fediverse in one fell swoop within a matter of minutes. On the other hand, I also was like, is this really the best way to do this right now? And what if this happened with someone else? And what if it was more of a gray area? And how would we handle that?
So I found kind of your experience really interesting because that really illustrates a couple of shortcomings we have in terms of existing moderation approaches on the Fediverse, right? Number one is kind of like information sharing mechanisms across people. Like you're someone who knows other people, you could directly contact other people, you could use the Fediblock hashtag, you understand how to navigate this space. But given that you need a certain degree of moderation experience in order to even handle that whole situation. If you're someone new to the Fediverse, for example, or if you're someone who's, doing this on a volunteer basis, you really just have to learn moderation on the fly, make the best decisions you can based on your own judgment, and go like, I hope this is going to work. So a way in which things will probably need to improve in some way is just for there to be more information sharing and tooling that makes information sharing easier, so that you don't have to, in order to set up a new server, identify all neo-Nazi accounts out there, manually block all of them in order to have a server that's not filled with toxic or problematic content.
It's fascinating to hear your personal experiences as both, your role with Flipboard and your role with the particular implementation of I presume Mastodon was the platform in use there. And part of our work at IFTAS, we did 2 big canvases last year of moderators. And one of the questions we asked was, how long have you been a moderator? And I think roughly, I want to say it was between 20-25%, less than a year. Wow. And, that's a big thing to think about. But that said, we are enjoying a wonderful curve of adoption and usage. And in that, I think your actions highlight something I saw was polycentric, where is decentralized all the way down to the individual? Is it 8 billion people making decisions? Or is it community leaders like yourself who've set up an instance, a service on the Fediverse, and therein adopted your ability to pick up those hammers? And what I'd say to that is the sooner, the faster, the better we can equip people with ways to not just communicate this particular account, this particular server, bad, good, indifferent, but what are the community norms? How do they impact you? How do they align with you culturally, geographically, religiously, whatever your background and whatever your community is doing? How do we permeate the Fediverse with those norms so that there's a shared vocabulary, a shared language, a shared understanding of what it is to defederate? And for that, I hope, and I heard Samantha say, going with your gut feeling, I'm a huge proponent of, in this particular instance, a federation policy. Just write down what it is that it takes to federate or defederate with someone, so you have something to point to. And if we can sort of start sharing those more than individual domains, we can start, adding to that decentralization of governance and democracy, so that people are making decisions more informed with a group, without a group, whatever their community is doing.
I think another interesting thing that I was thinking about from Mike's, what Mike told us about, was that, yours was a pretty clear-cut case of, well, that person's a neo-Nazi. You probably don't want to federate with them. And in the context of trust and safety, there are a couple of cases that are pretty clear-cut, right? Like child sexual abuse materials, spam bots, neo-Nazis, like deeply problematic behavior that most people would agree they probably wouldn't want. But then questions of defederation or blocking get a lot more gray when it comes to, interpersonal conflict or disagreements over certain issues that result in someone like getting blocked or getting defederated from. And that's kind of a shortcoming of the use of Fediblock as it is, because you don't really have a good understanding of why someone decided to block someone. And there's a question of like, is there some way to build up a system so that people could opt into other people's selections based on certain criteria? Is there a way for people to tag the reasons why they decided to defederate or block certain accounts? And could that make it an easier, lower cost, less labor intensive way for people to choose how they want to moderate their own communities?
Yeah, Samantha, that's a really interesting point. Because, let's just say, for example, that the administrator wasn't clearly a neo-Nazi, right? But there were some other people on the instance who were, but then, you can't look at every single person. And so you don't know, there might be some really good people who are on that instance and then some problematic actors who are on that instance. So you wouldn't want to just block the whole instance out of the gate in that case, right? And then further to that, it did make me feel a little bit queasy when I posted to Fediblock, like, hey, I'm blocking, Flipboard is blocking these guys because they're neo-Nazis. And I was thinking, what are the neo-Nazis going to say about that? And it did seem a little bit public, right? It feels to me like there should probably be some confidential ways of dealing with this, right? That are, perhaps, I could see if you were a moderator for 1 year, like, do you really want to put your name out there or your account out there as like, hey, we're blocking these guys because of X, Y, and Z. So it seems like you could probably be on the receiving end of a fair amount of, problematic posts as a result of that.
I can say safely, I've never personally used Fediblock. There's a community of instant, putting that together that I don't think I adequately represent. So I don't use the tag, both for its, from whence it came, and like you, it's a little too public. But I would also stress there are numerous communities of varying shapes and sizes of folks who are sharing threat intelligence in all manners of means and detail. We operate one or two. I'm aware of many others. And those might be a group of like-minded administrators who are seeking to form almost like I think of the old web rings, right? Just a consolidated group that has a shared desire for what they want to be achieving in the Fediverse. Larger rooms, I've seen rooms with hundreds and hundreds of administrators swapping information.
These in Discord? Where are these rooms?
I've seen, so there's many Discords. There are many matrices, not sure of the plural there. I would shamelessly plug IFTAS. We operate a trust and safety moderators chat community and a relatively newly hatched web forum with various private groups for folks to share information.
You just recently came out with IFTAS Connect. Is that right? And so that would be a place that I would go to do a more sort of kind of professional moderation job for this, rather than just posting on, with a Fediblock hashtag. Is that the idea?
Yeah, I'll shy away from the term professional. I'll go with elevated.
Elevated, okay. A little bit more private,
But definitely,
well.
we have very. So first of all, it's a gated community. We're vetting who's coming in. So we're looking for community moderators, managers, trust and safety professionals, academic researchers in the space.
I would need to have applied to get in.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We have a public library of policy guidance, legal and regulatory guidance, all the bits and bobs that you can imagine you might be able to take away and read. But to get into the group, we are absolutely vetting. We need a safe space for people to discuss very sensitive issues, and then even within that community, we then have some deeper layers of security. So we have an information sharing and analysis center that we just formed, which I think probably about a dozen and a half folks right now. And again, that's even more vetted as to how you're going to approach the information, how you're going to be cautious about how you say it and when you say it and where you say it, that sort of thing. And various subgroups within the community where folks can coalesce around a particular topic or a particular platform. So that's one way of doing that for sure.
Yeah. And so for people who are listening and who want to check this out, where should they go on the web to see this?
Oh, connect.iftas.org, IFTAS, connect.iftas.org. Plenty of resources there without even signing up. And we've even had folks who are very much in the space and not sure they want to sign up because they don't want to be seen to be saying a certain thing or making a certain decision. So we have some privacy options for how you get in. You can, contact me directly if you need a more private account, that sort of thing. But yeah, please dive in, connect.iftas.org and apply for that account today.
And Samantha, you just recently posted a paper with Yoel Roth, or co-authored a paper that was, I thought, pretty much a definitive, piece around how moderation and decentralized networks could work, should work, where the strengths are, where the weaknesses are. I thought it was a phenomenal paper. when you look at all the world of decentralized moderation, do you feel like it has the potential to be a fundamentally better, stronger moderated model than, these walled gardens? Or do you feel like actually, it's hard to tell which, world is going to be better?
Decentralization is so incredibly interesting because it gives people the freedom to create their own forms of governance and their own rules and their own communities. I think the rise of decentralized media is a sign of kind of groups of people who want to move beyond a centralized model where moderation is conducted by private companies in ways that might fall short of different community needs. And that decentralization offers kind of just an opportunity for exploring very, very different kinds of governance. What we see and what we go through in the paper is how in the existing space as we see it right now, there are possibilities, but there is also a lack of tooling, a lack of coordination devices that can help even the most well-intentioned moderators handle complex threats. Like, take, for example, how oftentimes a lot of going back to again the story that you started off with that like a lot of decisions of defederation or banning or blocking accounts have to be done manually. It's very much dependent on the admin or moderator to make a lot of these decisions. It's very labor intensive. A lot of these decisions are really difficult to make. Like, what does it mean to make that process easier? Right now, moderators, at least on Mastodon, can be pretty easily overwhelmed by CSAM, by spam bots, by a lot of coordinated inauthentic behavior because they don't have the resources to longitudinally track threats or to easily remove like duplicative content through automated means. Take, for example, if a bunch of spam accounts are posting like the same hashtag or like the same URL across a bunch of services, moderators would have to remove that one by one on their own. Like, that is not a viable model. That takes a lot of time. And if there's a big enough like attack, it's very easy for like a small group to get overwhelmed. So what does it mean to build up the tooling, to build up the communication resources required for people to be well equipped to address those threats? That's kind of the biggest question that our paper is asking. And we provide a couple of potential next steps of what next needs to be done for us to build up trust and safety against collective security risks on federated services.
So, Jaz, obviously, these are the kinds of things you're focused on enabling to happen, right? In addition to these communities of people that can get together and talk about these moderation issues from across a range of instances. You also, I know, are doing mentorship programs. You have documentation. You also, I think, have shared lists of bad actors or bad instances that instance owners can decide to utilize. Is that right?
Yeah, we actually have a two-part program that merges we have two lists. We have a do not interact list, which is human curated and reviewed. And then we have something we call the Cariad list, which is literally we observe roughly half of the Fediverse, or half of Mastodon, I'm sorry. And we observe what they block, and then we merge that. We look for consensus in what the largest portion of the Fediverse is blocking, and we amalgamate that into a list. So we track agreement across a gradation, 51, 66, 80% agreement. And then we tie that to a tool that we built called Fedicheck, which is Mastodon only for now. We can speak a little bit about where we are with tooling in the Fediverse and why it's so hard. So using the Mastodon API, you can approach the Fedicheck app, review the list, determine if that list meets your needs or not. We have no labeling yet. This is version 1.0. Version 2 will have labeling by harm. But for now, it's literally a small selection of a few dozen servers similar to the one it sounds like you encountered in your opening problem. And then, as I said, you can then sort of pick and mix from an observation model of what your peers are doing. And I think that we took that as sort of a first step as what would that look like and what would the pain be in the tooling. and it was a lot of pain to build. But that's the sort of the shared list approach. I will say it's not a shared list. We don't share the list. One of the biggest issues that I feel is tough to surmount right now is it's easy to place a block programmatically, very hard to remove that block programmatically. So the list is only available through FediCheck, because that way we can ensure that if something falls off the list, we had a number of, when the spam wave hit some time ago, many of those servers started getting blocked by many of our observed servers. Therefore, we passed those silences recommendations on. When they retracted those, we then retracted them from FediCheck users. And so the list is not easily consumed outside of that addition and retraction application. But yeah, that's definitely a piece of the tooling that we've built over the past few months. And we're also very close to a polycentric CSAM detection and reporting module. I say polycentric because I really don't want to be the only person doing this, and we already have 2 other options lined up for folks who don't like this particular option. But it's very true, as Samantha and Yoel and their papers and all the contributors have made very clear. Tooling is required. It's not happening at the protocol level. It's not happening at the platform level. So we're pitching in and moving the ball a little bit up the field so that we can start seeing the weaknesses in the APIs, weaknesses in the platforms, and start that conversation about moving those things forward so that we can either get to a plugin architecture or some way of finding ways to extend that tooling to additional platforms.
So it sounds like what you're doing is kind of, there's no one person who's the arbiter of the list. It's more of like you're looking at programmatically all the different instances and what they've blocked, and then or silenced, and then you go in and sort of pull that together algorithmically. So that's kind of interesting because there's no one owner of the list at that point.
There's a small number of IFTAS ban hammer. We picked up the hammer like you did and said no. And those are illegal content or egregious, inauthentic, potential persistent threat type services. I want to say that's around about 30, 35 servers. It's not very large.
Oh, really?
And
only 35 servers?
On the do not interact that we specifically inject into that list. And then the bulk of that list is, as I said, it's like you said, it's derived from an observation of a very large portion of the Mastodon Fediverses, and only those servers that have a large active user base. Because we feel that, as I said, step 1, baby steps, that's a pretty palatable list to consume, especially this particular service was built specifically to service brand new administrators who need a day one list of lists. And right. I think even I'll just interesting statistic, a lot of folks are worried about governance of a list, how do you get on the list, how do you get off the list, who's in charge of the list. And we have a very long policy document that we workshopped for 3 months, and then we trialed the policy for another 60 days to see what it did before even putting this into the world. And of those servers that we observe, I think in total, they have a block or a limit of some kind, some recommendation on, I want to say it's about 1,600, 1,700 servers in total. They all agree on one. There is only one that they all 100% agree on. And I think that's a fascinating insight into decentralized governance and what it looks like. And I should stress for people listening, if you're one of our observed servers, you cannot be on the list and thereby consume the list and self-perpetuate the list. But yeah, one out of the, as I said, 1,700 domains is in 100% agreement as a do not. So we have a small injection of we've said no. and that goes into the list regardless of the observation. And then the bulk of the list is that observed list. And even there, I think it's about 130, 140 domains in total.
Well, I'm sure everybody's dying to know what that one is, but I don't want to give them any airtime either. So, so Samantha, one of the things that you talked about, is this concept of it's not just decentralized moderation; it's decentralized moderation rules and policies, right? So, which I think is actually one of the things that I find so awesome about the Fediverse, because not everybody thinks about content the same way. Culturally, you might be a researcher, and so you want to have a broader lens. You might be might be something where your kids are going to be on it, so you're going to want to be more careful there. There's all sorts of different reasons why you would want to have an instance have a completely different set of moderation policies than another instance. And as a user, what I also think is phenomenally powerful is that I can go to an instance that maps to the kind of policies that I, really value. It's liberating to be able to say, hey, we know what our policies are. This is definitely not our policy, and we're just going to make this decision, not worried that we're like making this decision for the entire Fediverse, right? It's for our, instance owners or for our instance participants, right? That I think is a really just wonderful aspect of the Fediverse. It does mean, though, that it's just more complex.
Yeah, my first instinct was to be like, okay, yes, but complicating that, it's also kind of difficult for everyone involved right now, right? Because if you see, for example, an instance that is filled with just really bad content, there's still the question of, oh, did this happen because of the moderator's intent? Or did this happen because there weren't enough moderators to stop a bunch of, say, malevolent actors from overwhelming the server? Right now, and Jaz can speak a lot more to it, I'm sure, moderators have to kind of do the best with what they can on an ad hoc basis. So, yeah, you can develop your own rules. You can try to enforce on your own rules, but there can definitely be more support for moderators across legal, tooling, all kinds of different fronts to make their work a lot easier. On the other hand, as of right now, there's also pretty limited information, right, on how users choose between servers. You make your judgment based on what you see exists, or maybe based on the recommendation of someone else who's in a given community. But there isn't really a lot of information out there comparing, oh, this is this server's moderation policy on paper, and this is how it happens in actuality. And this is the number of accounts a given server has taken down compared to another server. So if we're talking about transparency and user choice, there's definitely more to be done there. Of course, that's also complicated because if you ask for a super small server to be really transparent about all the decisions they make, they could face flack from their users or from other community members. So all that to say, yeah, things are a little bit complicated there still.
Something that similarly brings me a lot of joy when I'm looking at the Fediverse, I curate a map. So I'm from Wales, Cymru, in the United Kingdom, and I say Cymru because Wales is actually the English name for the country, and it means foreigners. And the reason I got into the Fediverse was to build a Welsh-English bilingual social media opportunity for folks to provide digital citizenry for folks who want to interconnect over the internet in the language of Cymraeg, of the Welsh language. And so I have a special place in my heart for preserving language. And so just as a hobby, I maintain a server of a map of servers that offer either a particular geography or a language service. And when you look at that and you see the server in Madagascar, in Iceland, in Singapore, in Costa Rica, in Boston, and every one of those was put together by someone who gave a hoot about that for their language, for their culture, for their... And I just find that so visually rewarding to see in reality, right? That folks are the Tunisia server. Like, who knows what rules they're running, right? But they're doing it for the Tunisians, and I think that is just so incredibly empowering, and just a wonderful gift that we've sort of brought back to the web. And certainly, I think there's room to convene those folks in ways where they can share up to the point that they agree, and then happily disagree about some other things, and grow the movement that way. But it's just so wonderful, to your point, to see that governance literally, physically, and linguistically decentralized across the planet. It's fantastic.
Yeah, the local perspective on this, I think, is another element of moderation that is so hard to scale. If you're in a walled garden, right, you've got to have people who know and understand moderation, in all these different countries and all these different languages and all these different, dialects and local kind of customs and so on, right? And that's basically impossible to scale to. I mean, it's incredibly hard to do. But with all of these instances that are locally run by local administrators, and they have a set of, policies and rules that are probably fairly in common with a lot of others. But then there are specific local things that are going on. Maybe there's a local election. Maybe there's something locally happening. For example, the SFBA guys were telling me how, as the Waymo cars are in San Francisco, a lot of normal, usually polite people get very angry and can say some truly problematic things, because of these Waymo guys. And so, they'll get put in timeout, right? And for, a little bit of time. And it was interesting because that was like a very specific local dynamic, right, that they were kind of on the lookout for. And so I think that's another really powerful dimension of decentralized moderation, is you've got that local awareness and local experience. And, we haven't really talked much about other kinds of tools that potentially could help here. For example, in Flipboard, we have an LLM specifically dedicated to toxic comments. And we're actually, training that LLM to go and figure out, and flag for our moderators, hey, this is a very problematic, comment. And that helps us just, more quickly stay on top of, challenging situations with toxic comments. Have you guys been looking at these kinds of sort of AI-based tools that could allow you to sort of, as a moderator, be able to scale, to be able to look at a larger number of posts or a larger number of users, or find, other similar posts or similar users?
IFTAS, when we came to the market, did not show up with all of the answers or all of the solutions to any of these problems, but asked people of these things that we think you might want. What is it that we can, go out, source funding and provide for you? And it was very interesting to see that near the top of those lists was hate speech detection, toxic comment detection, with a very low desire for AI. But we have seen plenty of folks who are interested in at least being flagged that something needs to be reviewed. Very few people that we've run into are interested in an LLM or an AI or any kind of machine learning making decisions for them. They built a community. They have their moderators, and it's a pretty nice ratio, spread large across the Fediverse of moderators to members. So we've been looking at it. There are so many, as I'm sure you're aware from the work you're doing training, bugaboos with what is and what isn't toxic in what context, and if it's a recounting of a lived experience versus actual toxicity. So we are looking cautiously at tooling that you could tap into to at least open up avenues to get access to tooling or APIs that you otherwise wouldn't technologically or financially be able to access.
Commercial platforms typically have automated enforcement as part of their trust and safety processes, because when you scale up a service to some extent, it might no longer become feasible for a person or a group of moderators to go through everything that is posted. So kind of building on Jaz's answer, like there are some kinds of automation that could be useful, such as typical automation for like CSAM detection, automation for like detecting like the same kind of URL that's been posted, the same kind of hashtags that have been posted, and like removing that all in one fell swoop. But when it comes to LLM coding of like hate speech or like problematic content, as we've seen in the use of that on like commercial or centralized social media platforms, a lot of that can be subject to biases, and they might not be sensitive to differences in language, in context. So when it comes to deploying that kind of tooling, there also are various considerations in terms of how suited is it for a community. For example, something that is used to detect like nudity wouldn't be appropriate for like breast cancer awareness.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a very, very good point. And, back to your point, Jaz, how you use these tools is incredibly important, right? If they're just making decisions, that could be very problematic. But as a way to as an early warning detector so that moderators can get on top of, a problem, that seems quite valuable, which is how we use it at Flipboard. What came to mind for me as we've been on this journey of like thinking through how to use LLMs for this type of thing is that if there was a way where you could have kind of a transparent model where, hey, this is an LLM, here's the data that it's trained on, everyone would be aware of the data, here's what we're training it on. And then, then everyone knows what this particular classifier is going to, how it's going to score content that it sees. And then, of course, you could decide, whether you want to, how much you're going to trust the readout from this tool or not. But I think that concept of like a shared training model, right, for that early detection is something that could be really interesting, and certainly something that I've been thinking a lot about as, Samantha, you mentioned some of these other companies that have been operating larger networks for a long time at scale. They have to have some of these automation tools because there's just too many people, too many things going on, just to do it all manually. So one of the things I'm hopeful for is that those companies and Flipboard can ultimately get into a mode where we could actually start to contribute some of these tools to the greater community, right? And then kind of collaborate on the training of the tools or the development of the tools, do it in an open source model so that, we could all benefit from them, right? And ultimately have like a whole suite of things that, moderators could decide to utilize.
Yeah, because a massive existing gap we see right now with tooling is that a lot of it, in order to have tooling, you need funding. And a lot of decentralized social media platforms and a lot of servers run either based on community contribution or just the moderator's own expense. So there are many things that need to be done in terms of creating a funding cycle or finding ways to like fund tooling efforts to make this just to make sure that there's more tooling out there.
Yeah, I'll throw in. So IFTAS has three main goals. One is community. One is sort of trust and safety support with the regulatory and compliance guidance and that sort of thing. And the third piece is what can we buy for you that you can't, right? Either you don't want to execute a contract, or you're in the wrong country, or you just don't have that money. Malware, for example, or bad URLs. Some of these problems are, I wouldn't say solved, but very readily remedied to a large degree simply by moving dollars from IFTAS to API provider and saying we would like the list of bad URLs now, please. The question is getting that intelligence into the Fediverse implementation, whether it's Mastodon or something else. And Mastodon, by far the most mature in terms of its API, and most mature in the amount of people who've put effort into the trust and safety features of it. And still, it is incredibly hard to work with as a third-party developer, as a third-party trusted flagger, let's say. So in terms of the funding, one answer, I think, is IFTAS and others pitching in on sort of the Fediverse's version of composable moderation, as Bluesky terms it. Whereas instead of it being sort of codified at the protocol level, it's codified at the people level. And people can, as you said, they could take a look at that model, say, that one meets my needs. I will take that, please. Thank you very much. But I'll say over the past year, we've had money that we would have loved to have spent on IP reputation, on URL reputation, on spam detection, and we simply don't yet have a way to move that information into the platforms. So that, I think, the two tools that we've been working on, one is over the API, the second is over webhooks. And so we're approaching that now as a way, if we could get more platforms to take up standard webhooks as a way to move information between services, then maybe that's a way through. Because it's really painful to have to work on one platform at a time.
Samantha, what's your take on composable moderation, the Bluesky ideas there? Have you looked at that?
I think it's really cool. I think that it's a way that allows users more flexibility in terms of the content they do and don't want to see. I think it's a really interesting kind of new model of governance that just really is able to capture the nature of decentralization, which is that you are meant to empower users to create their own feeds and decide what content they do and do not want to see.
And what's really interesting about the implementation there? So IFTAS operates a Bluesky labeling service. We are not labeling anything as yet. We took their open source moderation tooling, stood it up, and we've been looking at moving the sort of core common harms and definitions into that to start playing with that. But what's interesting about that is people are subscribing to IFTAS as a moderator and we're not doing anything, and they're not caring because they've shopped for numerous of these labeling services and they're meeting their needs. But more interestingly, folks on Bluesky or an @proto instance that subscribe to, for example, the IFTAS labeler can say, I'm interested in your label for explicit content. And then we, look through the content and we label it howsoever we do. And then we pass that information back to the client, not the instance. And the client is configurable to interact with that label. So you not only get to shop for the labeling of your choice, you get to shop what happens with it. Right. So, explicit content, with the comment about different kinds of communities, some all, some none, or hide, blur, but that's at the client level. You get to not only shop for who you trust to flag or label content, you also take on our defaults, which are then configurable by you as the end user of what to do as you ingest that label. Fascinating.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So there's an election coming up in the United States that I'm sure is going to create a fair amount of challenges from a moderation point of view. As you talk to instance owners, you look at this from your professional point of view. What are you most concerned about as we go into this election cycle in the Fediverse?
Coordinated and authentic behavior. The Fediverse is not well equipped to deal with it because in order to how centralized platforms deal with coordinated and authentic behavior, it includes longitudinal tracking of who the threat actors are and what they're up to. That's super resource intensive. There's the issue of having centralized telemetry, which means having an overview of what accounts are on the service and what their activity is. When you are an admin or moderator, you only have access to what's going on your one server. So if someone wants to really cause chaos, it's a lot easier for them to hide among the crowds if they have, say, 1 or 2 accounts in each server, as opposed to 100 accounts posting the same thing on one service. So there are many ways in which we aren't ill-equipped, and I think it was Jaz actually who pointed out that 1 or 2 servers that might have already tried to do something funny before, those weren't very effective. And I'd also be careful to kind of overhype the threat, because just because a coordinated and authentic, like a set of coordinated and authentic accounts exist doesn't mean that they're necessarily effective. A lot of them often just kind of do their own thing within their own little crowds. But if something is effective, right now we don't really have the infrastructure to detect or handle them in any meaningful way.
It's, I believe, the number of nations holding meaningful elections this year is more than in human history in 1 year. It is an incredibly interesting time for humanity at large around the planet this year. And we've been approached, and many are having the conversation around what to be concerned about, especially with election interference. We have seen coordinated and authentic activity for sure. We've seen servers dedicated to just trying to inject content into the Fediverse. We have seen coordinated accounts. We monitored someone or a group setting up 1 or 2 accounts on dozens of servers, attaching them to an LLM creation tool that was generating sort of harmless, look at the beach, followed by a particular message about a particular influence that they were interested in pushing. And, that was just shoe leather, no automated abilities to either observe it, detect it, or report it. But it's really happening. I will say that I think far too few people understand just how many organizations are pulling in all of the content on the Fediverse, not using ActivityPub, or certainly not bilaterally communicating with ActivityPub, and observing and investigating disinformation, misinformation, interference, all manner of activities. And these folks are operating for their own benefit, for the world at large. They're not Mastodon people or ActivityPub people or Fediverse people. They're disinformation people. And they're monitoring numerous platforms. And the Fediverse is one of them. And they are pulling everything in, and they are examining it. And the Fediverse is not generally benefiting from their findings, although we are working on that. Again, we have 2/3 of that figured out. It's really just a question of how to get structured intelligence out to folks, and then what we want them to do with it. But it's certainly top of mind for many folks, and it's we've put quite a few resources up on how to research something that you think might be disinformation or election interference activity. So it's definitely being discussed and thought of. But I will end that with, but we built a Fediverse, non-algorithmic, chronological timeline, and you see what you follow and what your friends follow. And for the most part, to Samantha's comments on how well these actors can even do in the Fediverse, it's not that well, because there's no virality. If you don't follow them, no one sees them. So it's been interesting. Of course, it's a small audience, 15 million accounts, 1.5 active monthly. So it's not a rich pond to be fishing in to generate the influence you might be seeking to. But even if you were, it's just really hard to reach those people, because you can't buy your way to the top. You can't boost your post with some dollars. You can't make something viral. So it's a little bit, and I want to be very, very cautious here, it's a little bit self-healing.
Samantha, what's your take on Bluesky's custom feeds and how that can, be helpful or more challenging from a moderation point of view?
Whenever you have feeds or whenever you have algorithms, you become more vulnerable to what, as Jaz pointed out, kind of like algorithmic manipulation, inauthentic campaigns trying to boost content for more engagement. But I also just kind of bringing us back to Jaz's answer that when you have custom feeds or when there are more ways for people to choose how they want things algorithmically ranked, there can also be inherent resilience in the system. That very much depends on how people use it. So I still feel like we're a little early in like how people are kind of choosing to use these tools to really tell anything. But it's just exciting in terms of how it allows people to, again, like customize their own experiences in terms of what they do and don't want to see.
Samantha and I were in the room with a large company that has large algorithms recently. And it was over the lunch break that it dawned on me very clearly, something that had been sort of eating away at the edges all day. The algorithmic choices available on big social are so diametrically opposed to the intent of the Fediverse. And quite simply, they want as many eyeballs for as many minutes, right? That is the value proposition that they can sell to investors and advertisers. And then power to you, good stuff. Keep going. The Fediverse, when we have more eyeballs for more minutes, we pay that bill, right? If I accept your toxic content, I'm literally paying to host it and transmit it to others. And the core intent is to facilitate meaningful human interaction, I believe, is what I see the most. And so, unfortunately, the big bad algorithms have generated such a bad name for themselves that it's very hard to have that conversation in the Fediverse with some portion of that audience. But we have, we have the Explore feed. There's some algorithm there. There's something happening there to tell you this is trending and this is, more people are interacting with this. As a hobby, I administer the Welsh instance. The moderation team handles that. I don't do the moderation there, but I'm still the admin. I've got the buttons. And so recently I just sent the question to the community. What is it you like about this? Why do you like it? And let me know if I can tell other people. And I was really struck by how many of those responses were, I get to see the things I want to see. I get to see the things I asked to see. No one's telling me to look at something I didn't want to see. And of course, I'm aware of that. I've long been aware of that, but it was so really visceral how folks were very clear on something that you think is sort of a big hokey technology problem. And these were, people doing crochet and walking in the park, and these aren't your sort of activity pub tech nerd. These are just folks who just want to have some fun, read some content, read some posts, maybe post themselves. And I would say, a good fifth to a quarter of those responses were to that specificity. I get to see what's interesting to me. I get to see what I asked for. So I think there's room, as you've both mentioned, for some form of algorithms that can be opted into, configured, tweaked. We run one on Bluesky, of course, for trust and safety. There's the trust and safety feed. And to some degree, Mike, Flipboard is an algorithm, right? I mean, this is a curated feed of wonderful content, and you can opt into that, and that drives what's coming in. So I would love to see more and more conversations around acceptable algorithms, and I think, seeing as he invented the internet, we should just rebrand them algorithms, and maybe that can just make them a bit more palatable.
Well, and then not having one algorithm to rule them all that is controlled by, these, profit interests that, in a completely non-transparent way, right? That is a fundamental strategic benefit of the Fediverse. And I'm very excited to see how that all plays out in the coming months and years. While the Fediverse is inherently decentralized, that's what it's all about. There's also a central group of people, Team Fediverse, who's working across all of these instances and disciplines and, platforms to just try to do the right thing collectively for the betterment of the whole. And that's incredibly exciting. I think, I'm incredibly grateful for the work that you've done, Jaz, with IFTAS and IFTAS Connect. And Samantha, I think the research that you've been doing and the paper you wrote is incredibly important. I highly encourage, we'll have a link to it in the show notes. I highly encourage people to check that out. This is obviously a ongoing topic. There's going to be a lot of twists and turns, especially in this election year. So it was great to get a chance to connect with you guys and learn more about this. And thank you for the work you've done. And thank you for being on .social.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Wonderful to have the conversation. And don't sell yourself too short on just how much you're contributing to pushing the Fediverse forward too.
Well, thanks so much for listening. You can find Samantha at samly.bsky.social and Jaz at jaz@mastodon.iftas.org. You can follow Mike on Mastodon at mike@flipboard.social and at mike@flipboard.com. Big thanks to our editors, Rosanna Caban and Anne Lay. To learn more about what Flipboard's doing in the Fediverse, sign up via the link in this show's notes. Until next time, we'll see you in the Fediverse.